and would like to walk through and have a committee and staff introduction, but I wanted to, I don't see Rich. He's going to try to take the roll by just visually checking everyone off instead of calling the roll. And we'll make sure that that happens before we get over. Want to welcome everyone, and want to point out that our committee rules have not changed, same as they were last year. And just wanted to ask if there's any questions. And Representative Osmond, did you get a copy of the committee rules come to you?
The official committee rules for all committees? Yes, I have.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
If there's no questions, we will just move on with the committee rules that we established last year. And first thing we'd like to do is we've got a new member to our committee, and have everyone, and we have make sure that everyone knows each other. So I'd like to just go around on a real quick and have all the committee members introduce themselves, especially so Representative Osmond, we have one name to learn. He's got a lot of names to learn, so we'll go around and introduce ourselves, and just if you tell where you're from, what district you are, and see, we'll have a test afterwards and see how many names that he can remember. So we'll start, go to my right, and Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick Hoheisel, 97th District, Southwest Wichita.
Barb Wassinger, 111th District, Hayes and Victoria.
Good morning. Virgil Weigel, 56th District, which is South Topeka and southwest part of Topeka. Thank you.
Megan Lind, District 49, Eastern Olathe.
Good morning. Dan Osmond. I'm representing District 48, and that's in Overland Park.
Good morning, everyone. Representative Mary Lynn Poskin, House District 20 in Leawood and Overland Park.
John Toplicar, Olathe, District 15.
Good morning, Mark Samsel, 5th District. It's Anderson, Franklin, Miami, and Lynn counties, parts of.
Good morning, Brian Burkamp, Southwest Sedgwick County.
Good morning, Tom Kessler, District 96 in Wichita, Kansas.
Avery Anderson, 72nd District, Newton.
Lucky I've got a bag of Milky Ways in my office.
Representative Reese Shue, I'm the ranking minority. I represent District 25 in Northeast Johnson County. I do also want to shout out Representative Finney is not here with us today for a very happy reason. She has finally gotten her kidney transplant that she's been waiting on for several years. So she is recovering right now, but will join us when she's able.
Representative Baker, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dave Baker from the 68th District, which is Chase County, Morris County, and Geary County, with the city of Harrington tucked in there also. And I've been driving back and forth, so this morning I had to drive a little faster. Thank you.
Appreciate that you drove just fast enough and you weren't pulled over along the way. And I'm Jim Kelly, and I represent the 11th District in Montgomery County, and my largest cities are the City of Independence and the City of Coffeyville. So, and if we could go, Melissa, would you like to start it off? And
I'm Melissa Rennick with Legislative Research, and my assignments include financial institutions, rural development, FI&I in the Senate, and insurance and pensions.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Archer. I'm with KLRD. This is my very first session, so hello, everyone. My assignments include this committee, as well as House Taxation, House Corrections, so I'll see some of you later, and also I am on House Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Heather O'Hara with Legislative Research. This is my 16th session. Very happy to say. I deal with ag and natural resources, Senate utilities, and of course this wonderful committee with rural development. Oh yes, and I also wanted to say that I'm very upset that my Iowa State Cyclones lost to KU last night.
I'm David Weiss with the Revisor Statutes Office. So we are the agency that drafts the bills and amendments. So if you have any bill requests or amendment requests as they come through the committee process, please contact me. Also, Natalie Scott is also from our offices. Also staffs the committee more on the rural development side of things. I'm more on the financial institution side, but she'll be usually on the WebEx as well. So.
We have our audiovisual man that helps us with anyone that we have online. And would you care to audio introduce yourself for the committee?
I'm Sam, and I will assist you with any technology needs you need.
Thanks, and I think we'll see emails from you that will come to give us the links if we're going to participate online or whatever. So watch for those. And we have, is Representative Donahoe on WebEx or? Nope. Okay. And Rich Mergen, is he? I don't see him. Oh, right. Oh, you're up there. You went clear. Yeah, I guess so.
Rich Mergen, I'm the committee assistant, 11th station so far, and 4th year with Chairman Kelly.
Thank you, Rich. And get the roll okay, our new way? Good. Okay. And we do appreciate Representative Shue mentioning, but Representative Finney and I have communicated by text for several days, and she has waited a long time for that transplant, and it's sure good to see, and it's good to hear that she is doing well with it. So we'll keep her in mind and be anxious to have her back when we get in. So with the introductions out of the way, the first thing we want to do, and we'll do it every meeting, is that we want to have a request for bill introductions. And if you have a bill to introduce, would like to have you give, we must have an RS number, so we'd want the RS number of the bill, and that we would want to have who it's being introduced for, and also would want to have be able to tell a little bit, just a snippet of what the bill is about, so that we can have that down in our records. So any bill introductions today? Yes, Melissa, you may.
And now I think I'm on audio. I wanted to introduce 22 RS 2436, which would reflect our discussion with the Joint Committee on TEFIs that occurred on December 7th, and basically contains the amendments that our office recommends for a supplemental bill.
Our committee approach is that unless there is an objection, the bill will be introduced and we'll take it up. And without objection, that bill is introduced.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Any other bills to be introduced to start out with? Well, that will be something that will be up as on the top of the list to start out each meeting. So today, what we're going to do is, last year, the TEFI, the Technology Enabled Fiduciary Financial Institutions bill, was passed. And one of the items that was in the bill is that there would be a joint committee report the Joint Committee met on December 7th, and that there would be a report from the Joint Committee that would come to the Legislature at the start of the session, and also a presentation from the Commissioner that will come up that will start the session. And on our Joint Committee report, like I said, the committee did meet on December 7th, and the very detailed, a lot of things were covered in the meeting, and Melissa Rennick was our researcher on the spot that was able to capture all of this at the meeting. And Melissa, appreciate if you could kind of go over and review the joint committee meeting and any things that were pertinent for men or directed to our committee, which we just had one of them, the introduction of a bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I am here to provide the inaugural report for the Joint Committee on Fiduciary Financial Institutions Oversight. And as the chairman mentioned, this committee first considered the legislation that eventually led to both the Oversight Committee and the regulation of an entity known as a TEFI. So we're going to use a few abbreviations. That's one you will hear throughout this presentation and today. This committee first heard that in the form of a bill recommending regulation of a technology-enabled trust bank. That language changed over time. Your hearing was on House Bill 2398 on March 22nd, and you recommended substitute for Senate Bill 98 to advance that measure to the floor. Again, this is essentially addressing how to regulate fiduciary financial institutions in Kansas. The establishment of the regulation of these entities included the oversight of the State Bank Commissioner and the Legislative Oversight Committee that the chairman mentioned. That was passed in a conference committee report for Senate sub for House Bill 2074. It created a 9-member joint committee, and in the report, which is on your committee page, it is in the early release testimony file for January 12th, 2022, and that report on page 3 outlines the specific roles of the new joint committee. This joint committee is to monitor, review, and make recommendations regarding fiduciary financial institutions' operations in the state of Kansas, to monitor, review, and make recommendations regarding the FidFin Fiduciary Institution Pilot Program, and to receive one of the reports the chairman has referenced, receive a report from the Office of the State Bank Commissioner prior to December 31st, 2021, that provides an update on the implementation of the TEFI Act, or the Technology-Enabled Fiduciary Financial Institutions Act, and its pilot program. The bill required that this report include recommendations from the Office of the State Bank Commissioner for any legislation necessary to implement provisions in the Act, and that has just been requested for introduction in this committee. Before highlighting the conclusions and recommendations found in the report, I'd like to review the format of this report and the function of the Joint Committee. As the chairman mentioned, the committee met December 7th. That it was authorized one meeting day by the Legislative Coordinating Council. The committee's activities review begins on page 4 of this report. And please note that the meeting agenda and any testimony submitted for the Joint Committee is available on the Legislature's website, ks.legislature.org/li, under the committee's navigational tab. Our committee reviser, David Weiss, provided an overview of Senate sub for House Bill 2074 with a section-by-section bill brief, and the highlights from that overview appear on pages 4 and 5 of the report. And KLRD also provided a memorandum that outlined the role of the Joint Committee and its membership requirements, as well as a timeline with key provisions included in Senate sub for House Bill 2074. That timeline is part of the report. It's very helpful to walk through those implementation requirements of the new law, and that's found in Appendix A of the report. The report then, I think probably the best place to start is one of the definitions that was referenced in David's presentation and is used throughout that report is that TEFI. So a TEFI is either a TEFI or a fiduciary financial institution is any limited liability company, limited partnership, or corporation that is organized to perform one or more of the activities and services authorized by the Act, has been authorized to conduct business as a fiduciary financial institution under the Kansas Banking Code pursuant to the provisions of Section 2 in this bill, has made, committed to make, or has caused to make a qualified investment, and has committed in or as part of its application that was required in Section 2 to conduct FIDFIN transactions, and including the distributions that are required by the bill. The committee received information from both the first fiduciary financial institution applicant, beneficent, or BEN, and its representatives, and the State Bank Commissioner and that office's representatives regarding those topics the Joint Committee is asked to monitor, namely the operation of fiduciary financial institutions in Kansas and the progress of implementation of the TEFI Act. That summary begins on the second column on page 5 of the report, with the summary of the response from the Bank Commissioner on the second column of page 7. I'll highlight just a few of the topics that have been addressed by these two primary conferees, Ben and the Bank Commissioner, including the working relationship between the two, the outstanding items related to the completion of the application process, planning and organization, charter status, and just briefly that proposed legislation that's now in this committee. The report also highlights the committee's discussion with the applicant fiduciary financial institution and the Bank Commissioner. That begins on page 9. Among topics addressed with Ben, the first applicant, was the implementation of the Act and its relationship with the OSBC. Beginning on the bottom of page 5, the representative from Ben characterized this relationship with the OSBC as transparent, productive, and helpful. He noted numerous meetings, conversations, correspondence, and documents that had been exchanged. And there were at least 10 meetings and numerous phone conversations. In addition, in order to assist in the application process and questions being asked, a team from the OSBC traveled to Ben's Dallas office to meet its team and to ensure questions were being asked. Ben has stated that it has fully implemented all of the TEFI Act requirements for issuance of charter, and it was noted that the OSBC was evaluating two issues. First, the audited financial statement. This had been requested by the OSBC, and Ben had submitted a draft. It is anticipated that the audited statements will be substantially and materially identical to the submitted draft. Background checks was another issue that came up throughout the committee meeting, and there is language in the TEFI Act that Ben characterized as permissive, that these are, that the language would be rather than shall be, and given the current backlog, it was taking some time for the FBI to process those checks, and efforts were being made to find another acceptable alternative to the OSBC. In terms of organization and transactions, Ben highlighted its efforts to comply with Section 2 of the bill, and there are 6 requirements that were listed that they have indicated were completed. On the topic of qualified investments, Ben highlighted the qualified investments requirements that were in the bill and how the applicant has complied. And if you'll recall, this was that there were to be at least 10,000 square feet of commercial, industrial, multi-use, or multi-family real estate in an economic growth zone. That first economic growth zone was established in Harvey County in a community of less than 5,000, and that is Heston, the city of Heston. On page 6 in the second column, you will see 3 locations where Ben has obtained property for its main office, conference center, and a proposed grocery store. It was also indicated in order to continue to meet this requirement that Ben is in the process of acquiring an abandoned neighborhood, also in that area with intent to redevelop into a multi-purpose commercial property, and that acquisition would bring Ben into compliance with the remaining square footage that was required. There is also discussion here of the application process, indicating on Ben's part that it believes that it is complete, pending the OSBC evaluation of the FBI fingerprinting and background check alternatives, and that Ben was ready to commence operations and needed a permanent full charter in order to conduct business. The next section relates to economic growth zones, and one of the features that was described by another representative of Ben is the economic growth zone, including the use of the tax-exempt entity, the governance reporting requirements, the economic growth zones, economic interest. This committee received information at the time of its hearing that Ben had indicated during committee hearings that it planned to distribute $9.9 million upon final charter authorization. Looking at the information from the alternative assets marketplace, Ben has instead said, looking at the transactions that are currently planned or ready to close in December of 2021, that could generate an additional $6.5 million on top of that original estimate. The beneficent president also stated that they do not have any proposed changes to the TEFI Act and did not believe any changes were warranted, excepting minor administrative and technical cleanup. The remainder of the section outlining the response from the applicant includes comment on the charter status and the pilot program, as well as an overview of the TEFI industry to look forward to the next movers on the TEFI front. The comment from the State Bank Commissioner begins on column 2 of page 7, and the Commissioner commented on the status of implementation of the TEFI requirements, specifically addressing the implementation timeline for those requirements, the status of the agency's promulgation of rules and regulations, proposed legislative changes, the status of the pilot program and its anticipated start date, and the time frame for the first examination by the OSBC before issuance of the former charter. So the first section here outlines the approach to the regulation that the Office of the Bank Commissioner took. The OSBC indicates and reminds that, and this was part of our discussion here in committee, there is no federal regulator for these entities, and it is not as similar to banks or trust companies. There are some differences, and so the approach to the regulatory timeframe and structure was outlined before the committee. The Commissioner did indicate that the OSBC has complied and met all of the deadlines that were imposed by the legislation. The Commissioner also indicated that the conditional charter required by the bill was granted on June 30th, 2021, meeting that July 1 deadline specified in the TEFI Act. The Commissioner also spoke to the relationship with the applicant, indicating the number of phone calls, texts, emails, and in-person meetings, and characterizing those communications and the staff visit to Dallas as productive. And the Commissioner then summarized the current state of the application and brought the committee's attention to the severing of a relationship between the applicant and GWG Holdings, which was a requirement in the application process, and also highlighted that the issue of the law allowing intangible assets as capital adequacy, which was the applicant's source for funding the FIDFIN transactions, that had been addressed, as well as highlighting a key delay that I mentioned previously related to both the receipt of the complete and final financial statements and to the background check provisions. The Commissioner stated that the agency's goal remained for the applicant to conduct business in an expeditious manner, that it could be necessary for the OSBC to extend the time in which that applicant can begin its pilot program and commence FIDFIN Act transactions pursuant to Section 25D of the TEFI Act. The next section looks at both agency rules and regulations. The committee received an update on the progress of those rules and regulations, as well as discussion on that first examination and the timing of that examination. And then finally, there is a highlight here of the proposed legislation. So there was language submitted regarding to clarify some issues that were unique to TEFIs. Those are outlined in the first bullet there at the bottom of page 9, as well as adding authority for the OSBC to set concentration limits for FIDFIN transactions and harmonizing some of those provisions with the existing approach for banks and trust companies. The final part of the report, absent the final conclusions, outlines a conversation the committee then had with both the applicant and the regulator. And so this was an opportunity for the committee to review the concerns that were stated and to assist in resolving some of those issues and learning more about some of the topics related to the implementation of the Act. And the Commissioner confirmed in this discussion that the pilot program started on July 1st, 2021 with the issuance of the conditional charter. And there were some other issues that the Office of the State Bank Commissioner needed to take into consideration for future TEFIs and regulation of the industry, not just this first applicant. And so there's a highlight of some of those discussions. And finally, either using the box or the last page, the committee, following this conversation, submitted recommendations. The first is regarding legislative intent. On the subject of legislative intent, this joint committee recommends and clearly states that a permanent charter be issued no later than December 31st, 2021, so that practical actions can be taken within that pilot program and other requirements. Addressing such actions would allow requirements and processes associated with the TEFI Act, including those items that remain at the discretion of the commissioner, for example, the promulgation of agency rules and regulations, and the timing of the examination and conclusion of the pilot program to move forward. Second, the committee recommends the draft legislation that was presented by the OSBC be introduced during the 2022 session by the respective House and Senate Financial Institutions Standing Committees. And the committee requested that this report be directed to both this committee and to the Senate Committee for your review and consideration of the law and its implementation. Mr. Chairman, that is a review of the inaugural report of the Joint Committee.
Good job, Melissa. Any questions for Melissa on the report? Well, it's even a bit, do we have? Oh, Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your report. It's very concise. Going forward with the pilot program, is there an end date of the pilot program to where it transitions into something else? I mean, am I expressing that way?
Yes, I think that was initially intended to really give information to the Office of the State Bank Commissioner so that it would be able to complete this applicant process, but then also have information regarding future TEFIs and the regulation of those. I think they can best speak to when that pilot program would end. The committee talked about a 12-week time frame. The applicant also there was also a discussion of 6 months. So it really was when it was in the best interest of both the applicant and the regulator to cease the pilot program.
And the start date on the pilot program was what date?
July 1st.
July 1st. So we're well past that 6-month time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have a follow-up question on it? The economic growth zone, which is, I believe, is City of Heston. Does the city or the county have to have any input into the parameters of how this entity functions, or is that completely out of their jurisdiction?
David can help me with this one. I don't believe the law speaks specifically to the requirements of either the city or the county. It does speak to generally requirements of the Department of Commerce and involvement of, there is a fund that's related to that, a TEFI fund for development and creation, and essentially to help with the qualified contribution coming into that zone. But I don't believe there were specific parameters for either the city or the county.
Okay, all right, thank you. And just to add on to that, on the end of the pilot program, I would assume that those background checks that are supposed to be done by the FBI or some other entity, would those have to be completed within the time frame of that pilot program, which is already 6 months out?
So I believe the best entity to respond to that would be the Office of the State Bank Commissioner. I do believe in one of the reports they are providing today, they will address that topic.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions, Representative Bergkamp?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 6, I'm just trying to see if I understand this right, where it's talking about their distributions in December. So the $9 million, is that then what they calculate the fee off of for the state of Kansas and like the growth zone? It's like the 2.5%.
So the fee is based off of the assessment that's created for it. Let's see. Yes, that would be the 2.5% of the aggregate financing balance is what's used there for the charter in the language in section 2. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Melissa. Very much. Well, to get into now the kind of the report that came from the Bank Commissioner's Office, I'd like to introduce Kansas State Bank Commissioner David Herndon that will give us the information, and like Melissa said, some of the items in the questions the Commissioner will address or can expand on further with questions. So welcome, Commissioner Herndon.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name's David Herndon, and I am the Kansas State Bank Commissioner. Appear before you today to report on the establishment of Kansas's first technology-enabled fiduciary financial institution, known as a TEFI, from the perspective of my office. TEFIs were created last year by Senate substitute for HB 2074, passed in the 2021 legislature and signed by the governor into law on April 21 of 2021. I'm joined today in person by Deputy Commissioner Tim Kemp, OSBC General Counsel Melissa Wagman, and Assistant Deputy CML Commissioner Jim Payne, so they may help me in answering questions if there are any. As you know, I appeared before the Joint Committee on Fiduciary Financial Institution Oversight on December 7th and provided a report on the status of the conditional charter that was issued by my office to Beneficient Fiduciary Financial LLC on July 1, 2021. Beneficient is the entity named in the legislation as the sole participant in the pilot program created by the Act. I intend to report on the status of the ongoing pilot program, the timeframe for examinations by the OSBC, the status of the OSBC's enactment of rules and regulations, and proposed legislative changes in accordance with Section 25E of the TEFI Act. That Section 25 of the Act calls for granting of a conditional charter to Beneficient and the establishment of a, quote, FidFin Fiduciary Financial Institution pilot program. Such conditional charter was granted on July 1, and the pilot program commenced effective that date. The same section restricted Beneficient from commencing any FidFin transactions, custodial services, or trust business in this state until the earlier of December 31, 2021, or the date that the Commissioner's Office adopted rules and regulations pursuant to Section 22 and amendments thereto in the Act. At that December 7th hearing, the Joint Committee on Fiduciary Financial Institutions Oversight provided direction that Beneficient be authorized to commence FidFin transactions as of December 31, 2021. Therefore, the pilot program moved to its next phase, with Beneficient receiving transactional authority on that date. The law establishes the OSBC as the sole regulatory body for Kansas TEFIs. No federal counterpart in the regulatory field for TEFIs is named or exists. Regulatory examinations by our office will commence during the calendar year 2022 as soon as a book of business is sufficient that warrants an examination, and will be conducted pursuant to regulatory industry established examination protocol, except when those protocols contradict the Kansas TEFI. The Kansas TEFI Acts will prevail over traditional protocol in that regard. And under the Act, as now written, the pilot program will end upon the first examination. So I think that addresses your question, Mr. Representative. Examinations that we will conduct will address compliance with our state law as presented in HB 2074, trust law, information technology standards, and applicable federal requirements that address all financial institutions, such as Anti-Money Laundering and Bank Secrecy Act rules and regulations. The examination standards given in HB 2074 preclude any safety and soundness determination that would meet our industry-established regulatory protocols for safety and soundness that apply to banks and trust companies. The OSBC has determined that administrative regulations are not essential for Beneficient to begin operations as a TEFI in our state, and accordingly, we are avoiding any unnecessary regulatory burden on this new industry and have focused instead on learning the new industry from our first TEFI to better understand its business model and processes. That should help us write regulations for TEFIs when the time is appropriate. We think the time will be appropriate in the first quarter of calendar year 2022. Section 25E of the TEFI Act charges that OSBC with the duty to provide a report to this committee and the process of the pilot program, including recommendations for any legislation necessary to implement the provisions of the TEFI Act. In preparation for this meeting and the December 7th Joint Committee meeting, we were directed to provide recommended legislation for the 2022 session. Therefore, I've attached to my written testimony a bill draft that includes our recommended changes. At the December 7th Joint Committee meeting, we were requested that it was requested that the reviser put those changes into the bill for both chambers, so both formal bills containing these process changes will be available. To clarify some issues unique to TEFIs is the goal of this proposed legislation. And the first of that is what the OSBC will evaluate during an examination. The second is what happens if a TEFI stops operating either voluntarily or involuntarily. Who becomes the successor, who becomes the liquidator, who's charged with what duties. The certain required notifications to the OSBC be prompt and in writing, exactly the definition of a FIDFIN transaction from the sale or from the perspective of the customer, and when assessments shall be due for TEFIs. Our recommended changes add authority for the OSB to set concentration limits, as you've heard before, and these concentration limits might be based on type of industry, geography, unique risk to certain portfolios and that sort of thing, because remember, these are alternative assets that by definition have no or little liquidity, so the concentration issue becomes critical. Our recommended changes also harmonize some provision with existing approaches for banks and trust companies, specifically that initial fees are received at the time of the application, how fees and assessments are paid, the grounds for which an application might be or could be denied, that the OSBC can examine a TEFI's service providers. This is especially critical for data processing, information technology, cybersecurity, that sort of thing. That the OSBC can require a TEFI have insurance, bonding, and/or additional capital to fund its transactions. That the OSBC can require disclosures to consumers, that assessments are paid and allocated in July, and the extent that a TEFI can engage in traditional trust business, that TEFIs are mandatory reporters for purposes of elder abuse. These recommended changes also make a handful of technical corrections and some minor wording improvements to better fit the TEFI context. The proposed change of Section 25F of our bill clarified that the charter process and when the pilot program would end. The Joint Committee's directive for Beneficient to commence full operations by December 31st eliminated the need for that provision. So in light of that development, we no longer need this particular section. We do, however, request retroactive clarification be added to the TEFI to capture the Joint Committee's intent to convert the conditional charter to full transactional authority on December 31, 2021. The change will help clarify in the law that the legislative intent as expressed by the Joint Committee is well understood. As to the background checks, the OSBC as a standard conducts criminal background checks for all of its regulated entities and the principals involved in those entities. We had been waiting for beneficent background checks from the FBI for several months with no progress whatsoever. We requested the assistance of U.S. Senator Jerry Moran to help expedite the background check process with the FBI. I've attached to my testimony a letter from the FBI addressed to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dated December 9, 2021, 2 days after the Joint Committee met. In this letter, the FBI concludes that Senate sub for HB 274 does not meet its requirements for access to the FBI criminal history record information. As a result, OSBC is unable to complete its normal background checks. And the reason given by the FBI is, and I'm quoting here, the category, any other person of the proposed fiduciary financial institution related to the application deemed necessary by the State Banking Board is overly broad. The KBI forwarded this information to my office on December 16th, and my legal department immediately called the legal department of FBI on the same day. Nobody answered the phone. We got left a voicemail asking for clarification, and as of this morning, the FBI has not responded to that voicemail. So again, to conclude, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I hope my comments have reflected all the work the OSBC has done to reach our common goal of a successful pilot program and our state attracting subsequent TEFIs to beneficent. We appreciate the opportunity this morning to update the committee on the current status of the TEFI industry and the pilot program in the state of Kansas. So I would stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions for the Commissioner? Representative Neely?
Could you please explain why, or perhaps an example, why the potential for elder abuse was put in there?
All financial institutions are required to report elder abuse in Kansas, whether they be a bank, a trust company, a consumer lender, anything is required, and we just thought that the same standard should apply to a TEFI.
Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here today. I just want to talk about the background check issue. I know you brought that up during the Oversight Committee on the 7th. Is this the only option we have, the FBI background checks? I know you said we were kind of exploring other avenues for that.
We have not determined any other avenues yet, and therefore probably will rely on publicly available information that would not include a criminal background check unless it were a public record. The problem is we don't have access to a nationwide database that's held by the FBI. So we could do, a periodic or perhaps the city or county that the principal resided in, but we wouldn't have access to the nationwide base.
And you guys haven't started that process yet?
That's correct, we have not.
You guys have a time frame of when you would probably wrap that up?
Because beneficent was granted full transactional authority, it pretty much diminished the need for that background check because they're operating now. So we're kind of at the mercy of that action.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Any other questions? Commissioner, a question to follow up on the background checks. I mean, right now we're dealing with the pilot, we're dealing with Ben, but going forward, do we need to change the language in the bill that gives the authority for future TEFIs to be able to access the FBI database?
Regarding or relying solely on the one correspondence we've received from the FBI that says it does not meet the standards, my answer is a qualified yes, with that it should be changed to meet that. However, I'm not in a position this morning to tell what that change would be.
So that's not in the bill introduced, but something that would need to be added to it as soon as we know what those standards need to be.
That is correct. If we are able to receive a callback from the FBI for clarification, then I'd be in a better position to further answer the question.
So you plan a follow-up with the
We've
FBI?
again reached out to Senator Moran's office, and I don't want to throw the FBI under any bus, but the reply was they can take up to 150 days to reply to emails. I don't know how long it takes them to reply to a voicemail. So we have, again, reached out. All of this came about on December 16th. So 2 holidays in between and a storm on the East Coast that paralyzed the Virginia interstate. I have no idea if any of that had an impact. But we will continue our efforts to get clarification from the FBI.
Okay, thanks. Questions? Representative Wassinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are all these rules and regulations that you're coming up with, new requirements, is it to make it look more like a bank or a savings and loan as opposed to a TEFI?
No, just to the,
completely different.
to the contrary, they are designed to address specifically TEFIs, not only the one that we have now, but any subsequent TEFIs that might come in.
Do they run, I'm sorry, may I ask another question? Do they run parallel to what you've been doing for banks and other financial institutions?
The examination process will be different because of the TEFI law that was adopted. We will not be able to consider certain safety and soundness provisions. For example, capital under the TEFI law includes intangible assets. That is not permitted in a traditional financial institution. Earnings cannot be considered to a TEFI. That is not the condition for a traditional bank or savings association or that sort of thing. TEFI does not hold deposits, so another component in an examination industry accepted standard would be liquidity and interest rate sensitivity. Those are lessened, if not eliminated, in a TEFI because they don't hold deposits and therefore they don't have a cost of funds associated other than traditional debt. So there will not be as thorough an examination from a safety and soundness perspective as banks and trust companies receive.
One more. Thank you. Does it substantially change the original legislation?
No, the rules and regulations being considered and adopted will absolutely adhere to and respect the law as it's written.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Hsu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for missing the interim meeting. Just for my own knowledge, so Ben was given a full charter essentially without the full background check that we were able to get from the KBI, correct?
Beneficent was given transactional authority.
Okay, and then so pending, this is just a theoretical, but should something eventually come back from a full FBI background check, does your office have the ability to rescind that transactional authority as a result of a negative result from a background check?
The way I understand it, yes. Or if there were other issues through our examination process that raise concerns, then I presume that there are similar actions that we can take, corrective actions that we can take. Typically, those are as simple as a board resolution. It could go from a board resolution to the next step of memorandum of understanding. Those are confidential documents between my office and the regulated entity. A public document that banks and trust companies and such deal with is called a consent order. That is actually a public document. And then the most drastic and the last step is a revocation of the charter to do business.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Commissioner, if I remember right from the Oversight Committee, the beneficent group, they claimed, or it was claimed that they have already cleared those exact same background checks in Texas. Is that correct?
I can't speak to that. I don't have access to the Texas banking records. I do know that applications were made in Texas by beneficent, but I can't speak to the background check if that was completed or waived or never got around to.
Yeah, I just remember during that Oversight Committee that it was claimed that they had already passed these exact same background checks in Texas. So I just wanted to make sure that was clarified and on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering what the status is of the receipt of audited financials versus draft financials.
There's been no change. We have not yet received audited financial statements. We did learn through a public filing last Thursday that the accounting firm that the GWG Holdings uses, which has been stated as doing the beneficent financial statements, has refused to accept renomination as the GWG's accountant going forward. So I don't have any idea if that's going to delay. I've traded emails and phone conversations with the president at Beneficient for that as recently as this morning, but we just haven't hooked up, so I can't. But no, we have not received any additional financial statements.
Any other questions? One maybe last one. On the background checks that would be mentioned, would it be normal policy for if a bank had a Texas charter and applied in Kansas to accept what was in place or what had been done in the other state, or would you reprocess everything for your satisfaction?
I want to be certain that I understand the question. If an existing Texas financial institution wanted to open a branch in Kansas, is that the basis of the question?
Yeah, if I'd filed all the paperwork and done all the background checks in another state, would those just transfer to Kansas and say?
The regulatory authority would remain with the host state, in this example, Texas. We would communicate with the Texas Banking Department to assume, and there's a reciprocity relationship between bank commissioner offices throughout the country, but the host state would simply say, presumably say, this is a operating entity, regulated, has met the requirements, and we would accept their work.
But in this case,
we would not necessarily see the report. It would just be, okay, we're good.
But in this case, there's not an operating entity as such, so.
Not one that's been regulated that would require or would recommend criminal background.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I understood that. Any other questions? Well, Commissioner, thank you very much for your report and for all the work that you've done on this to get everything going and in operation and to get the rules and regulations set up and the exam. And I'm sure we'll hear from you in the future also. And so you don't have to sit down and get back up again. I know you've got another report that you're going to give us, which you usually do every year. is an overview of the Office of the State Bank Commissioner and the types of activities that have taken place since we met in 2021.
I do, and I'm delighted to give that report and provide update with the strength of the Kansas banking community and the mortgage and consumer lending businesses in Kansas. And I have provided the committee a PowerPoint kind of presentation chart that if you have access to, great, and otherwise I'll not read to you, but I'll highlight some things. The Office of the State Bank Commissioner is divided into 5 main areas. Those are the Division of Banking and Trust, the Division of Consumer and Mortgage Lending, our Legal Department, our Administrative Department, and our Information Technology Department. We have 110 authorized employees, 3 current openings as of Friday. We are a fee-funded agency. 100% of our funding is paid by bank assessments and CML, which is the Consumer and Mortgage Lending Division, licensing fees. And we have a budget of a little over $11 million. I'll address my comments first on the banking division because banking's in our name. That's kind of what we do. And point out that the health of the Kansas banks is very, very good. We examine all banks and trust companies once every 18 months, in an 18-month cycle, or more frequently, based on the bank or trust company's total asset size, or if it's a troubled or problem bank. We alternate examinations with our federal counterparts, primarily the FDIC and the Federal Reserve Bank, and we conduct IT and Bank Secrecy Act examinations as well. Sometimes those examinations are joint with our federal counterparts, other times we do them on our own. As of this morning, we supervise 179 state-chartered banks, 32 active trust departments, and 12 trust companies. The Division of Banking has over $120 billion of assets under supervision, and banks file a quarterly call report. So as of September 30, the last available data, there were $56.9 billion in bank assets in the state of Kansas. Trust companies file only an annual report, so this is as of 12/31 of 2020, there were almost $64.5 billion of assets under management. The December 31 financial statements are due to be filed by January 31, so information will be updated, and we'll post that on our website as soon as that is available. We have divided the state into 3 regions for purposes of examination and types of industries and that sort of thing. Our East region has 65 banks, and it's the Northeast, even though it's called East, it's Northeast Kansas, with field offices in Lenexa and Topeka. Our Northwest region has 50 banks with field offices in Salina and Hayes, and our South region, which geographically is the largest region, it goes from the lower half of the state, from the eastern Kansas border to the western Kansas border. There are 64 banks with field offices in Wichita. Our trust department, our trust company, and 32 active trust departments are examined by our trust region, which is statewide and headquartered in Topeka with offices in Lenexa. As I mentioned, examination protocol follows industry accepted rules and regs, and these are international. And it's known as the CAMELS rating, an acronym for capital adequacy, asset quality, management capability, earnings, liquidity, and sensitivity to interest rate market risk. Ratings are on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the best and 5 rating is the worst. So back to that examination frequency, if you are a 4 or a 5 rated bank, regardless of your size, you're going to be hearing more from us and more frequent examinations because of the nature of the risk in your institution. As I mentioned, problem institutions are considered those that are rated 4 or 5, but they're also considered if they're rated to 3. So you get a 1 and a 2 is a pass. 3, 4, and 5, you're considered some sort of problem institution, and you're going to have some enforcement action, probably limited to one of those 3 that I mentioned in my previous testimony: a board resolution, a memorandum of understanding, or the consent order, which is a formal order and made public for that. The good news is that as of December 31st, we only had 7 banks that were considered problems, and all 7 of those were rated a 3. There were no 4 or 5 rated banks in Kansas at the end of 2021. Banks are healthy, so 7 out of 179 were rated 3. A couple of those are improving. A couple of others are just kind of maintaining, but we haven't had any drop to a 4. And one of those banks is not considered troubled because of its financial condition, but because of some issues on compliance with Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering activities. So, you could say 6 financial, 1 compliance, 7 total. There are, as I mentioned, 179 state chartered banks in Kansas at the end of 2021. That's down from 186 at the end of 2020, and exclusively through mergers and acquisitions. And that's an industry-wide trend that I'll speak to in a minute. To give you a comparison, at the end of 2017, we had 203 state chartered banks in Kansas. 37 of our state chartered banks are members of the Federal Reserve System. There are 27 national banks in Kansas. We have not had any conversions from national bank charter to a state bank charter. However, we have had some inquiries in the last 45 days from more than one national bank that wanted to talk about the benefits of converting to a state charter. So that is a priority. I believe that if you think back and if you were following the candidate or the nominee to run the Office of Comptroller of Currency was not well received by the national bank industry. And I think a lot of them were considering if that person became the head of the OCC, that would be the trigger for them to formally pursue a charter change. That candidate subsequently withdrew her name from nomination, so it kind of has settled down a little bit. But we're still working with and would welcome any national bank to convert to a state chartered bank. The average bank size in Kansas is $313 million, and the median size is $150 million. Banks enjoyed a found money kind of event. As bad as the economy was and the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP, that was offered in 2 phases, in 2020 and 2021, the amounted in, as of September 30, 2021, when the second phase was formally over, Kansas banks had provided $704,718,000 of PPP loans in the second phase. The top 10 banks that, by dollar amount, are on the place, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are in the Kansas City area. 3 of them are in the Wichita area, and the others around the state. That was for phase 2. In phase 1, which occurred in calendar year 2020 and ended in September 30, 2020, Kansas banks provided $2.8 billion of PPP loans. And obviously, that was a huge demand for PPP loans. Kansas banks met that demand. And then the federal government's further actions to forgive a significant portion of those PPP loans allowed for a one-time found money event for banks not only in Kansas but nationwide. I mentioned the 217 banks back in 2016 is down to 179 now, but the assets under control have gone the other way, from 41.2 billion to the 56.9 that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So banks are becoming larger and they're becoming more sophisticated and they're doing different types of transactions than the historically local community bank did. We're seeing banks who are entering just the acronym just left me. FinTech kind of transactions that you're reading about or hearing about, and we're getting banks who are dipping their toes into, or can we do that? The FDIC and the Federal Reserve has been very, very cautious when they go through. We're hearing banks ask about how do they deal with Bitcoin and cyber currency and that sort of thing. Again, it's a nationwide, perhaps even a worldwide issue, but that's the sophistication that we've seen over the last several months and couple of years, as opposed to, we're a bank, we take deposits, you can open a checking account, a savings account, buy a CD, we'll finance your car, we'll finance your house, we'll finance your business, your farm, that sort of thing. So it's become much more sophisticated, and the asset growth has gone, which requires our staff to be much more in tune with what's going on, and a different type of training that goes on. Trust assets in the millions, as I mentioned, are at $64.5 billion, and that's up from 57 in 2016. So again, those trust companies are seeing greater and greater assets under control. The 5 largest Kansas state chartered banks are CrossFirst in Leawood, the largest, at $5.3 billion. Equity Bank in Andover at $4.2 billion. Security Bank of Kansas City at $3.7. Emprise Bank in Wichita at $2.3, and Kansas State Bank in Manhattan at $2.3. The 5 smallest banks, by comparison, the Farmers State Bank in Dwight is at $17 million. Dickinson County State Bank in Enterprise, also at $17.5 million. Prescott State Bank in Prescott at $14.8. State Bank of Burton at $12.7, and our smallest bank in Kansas based on asset size is the Walton State Bank in Walton with a little over $11.5 million in assets. As I mentioned, banks are doing well. Income is up. Earnings are good and expected to stay good. The return on average asset is a key indicator for bank profitability, and the banks also have the option of filing their income taxes as a subchapter S business if they have a holding company for that. So return on assets as of the end of the third quarter in 2021 was 1.38, which is very, very strong for return on average assets. And capital was also very strong. Capital level statewide is about $6.4 billion, or 12% of the total assets. Very, very strong. Leverage ratio, also very strong at 10.8%. So if you have an investment in a Kansas State bank, it's likely that that investment is doing quite well for you. Banks in Kansas like to loan money. 57% of their asset pool is in loans. Another 27% is in securities, hold about 10% in cash or available funds immediately, and then fixed assets and other assets combined for the rest of that. I spoke a little bit ago about charter conversions. We had none in 2021, but we do have some interest. There were none in 2020 either. The last one happened in 2019 when the First National Bank of Beloit switched its charter, and that's a $74.25 million bank. We've not had any de novos, any new charters in the banking business, but in 2020 we had 2 new trust companies, the Assured Trust Company and the Moneta Trust Company, both are headquartered in Overland Park. I mentioned also that there's been a significant number of mergers and acquisitions. We expect that to continue. We had 7 mergers and acquisition applications that were submitted in 2021. Those were approved. 2 of them occurred on the first business day of January 2022. So that's what took us down to the 179 level. We've had 11 applications for banks to open branches outside of their headquarters, and that activity is expected. Overall, we had about 37 total applications that were filed in 2021, and we conducted about 60 safety and soundness examinations in 2021. Moving on to trust companies, as I mentioned, nearly $64.5 billion of total assets as of the end of 2020. We think that's going to increase when their 2021 numbers are reported. The 5 largest are the Benefit Trust Company in Overland Park with nearly $21.5 billion. Midwest Trust Company also in Overland Park. Main Star Trust Company in Onega, the Bank of Labor in Kansas City, and Great Plains Trust Company in Overland Park. We are pleased to report that our agency earned on both the banking side and the CML side through an annual or an accreditation by the Conference of States Bank Supervisors, which is the industry trade association and quasi-governmental entity. First received accreditation several years ago. It's a 5-year deal, and they reaccredited the banking division last year in 2021, and the CML for the first time received its accreditation in 2021. We are also very active at the national level with members of our staff also participating on federal legislative committee and have the vice chair of that committee. We have representation on the Emerging Payments and Innovation Task Force, helps us with those transactions that I referenced earlier and the cryptocurrencies and the fintech types of business, and the State Supervisory Process Committee. The new division or the new responsibility for the banking division is also where the TEFI business will fall. And we've talked about that being established last year. It's a new lane of financial services that is unique to Kansas. Kansas is the only state, and to my knowledge, the only state that no other state is considering that. That's uncertain, but I've not had any phone calls or conversations with my counterparts that's saying that they are doing that. And as you know, TEFIs are high dollar transaction fiduciary financing, targeting individuals or businesses or entities with assets of $5 million up, institutions with $1 billion and up. We've gone over the time frame. We are in the second phase of the pilot program that will continue until the examination is done, which we expect to occur early in 2022. However, a date has not been specified yet. Then moving to the Consumer and Mortgage Lending Division, the role of this division is primarily two responsibility. That's license all non-depository entities that conduct mortgage business, money transmission, extend consumer credit, or provide debt management services. So if you loan money in the state of Kansas and you're not a bank and you don't accept deposits, and it's required that you be licensed in order to provide those services, that's what CML is doing. They examine entities licensed by the division for compliance with state and federal laws and regulations. They do not conduct safety and soundness examinations in terms of what a bank would receive. They also respond to consumer questions and concerns. We are seeing a flux of those in the last several days because under the stimulus programs at the federal level, there were moratoriums on evictions and payments and that sort of thing. Those have ended. So landlords and lenders are expecting to be paid now, and consumers, frankly, became a little bit expectations that they knew they were going to have to start repaying, but now that they have they're asking for additional help from our office in working with their landlords or their mortgage company. There are four state laws primarily that the CML reviews: the Kansas Mortgage Business Act, the Uniform Consumer Credit Code, the Kansas Money Transmitter Act, and the Credit Services Organization Act. These all deal with non-depository mortgage lending, consumer lending. Money transmitter is anything from a Western Union to a mom and pop organization that electronically transfers funds on behalf of the deal. We have almost 11,000 entities in Kansas as of December 31, 2019. But that grew dramatically, and we're at now 16,439 licensed entities on the CML side doing business in Kansas. 16,439. A significant portion of those are mortgage loan originators, and these are the people that respond to the ads of the Rocket Mortgage and the Quicken Loans and that sort of thing that says, oh, I can make more money originating mortgage loans than I can doing whatever I'm doing right now. Loan volume has dramatically increased with interest rates being as low as they have. In 2020, the last time that data is available, there were $48.6 billion worth of non-depository loans generated in the state. As I mentioned, money transmitters are entities that transfer funds on behalf of a consumer. They're regulated under the Kansas Money Transmitter Act, and our office licenses and examines these under that Transmitter Act. There were 169 licensed money transmitters in Kansas at the end of 2021. They included entities like Western Union and MoneyGram, but also PayPal, Google Payments, Facebook Payments, Apple Payments, and the like. So if you transfer money, you're subject to that. The target examination schedule for this is approximately every 36 to 40 months, depending upon the size and the sophistication of the business. We conduct both on-site and off-site examinations, and we share other states' examinations findings if somebody is doing business in Kansas, but also another state. We share our examinations with them, and they share theirs with ours. We have CML examiners located in Topeka, Wichita, Salina, and Lenexa. And then what happens to the money that we collect on fines for violating that? We redistribute it to Kansas consumers in education initiatives. Fines and penalties collected as a result of enforcement actions are deposited in the Consumer Education Settlement Fund and used exclusively for consumer education. We provide grants to consumer education programs statewide to support children and adults in their financial education. Since 1999, the OSBC has provided over $5 million in grants for consumer education, averaging $100,000 per year. And grantees have served more than 9,600 consumer and students last year alone. We partner with the Kansas Insurance Department and its division, the Office of the Securities Commissioner, and the three of us sponsor the Kansas Financial Scholars Essay Scholarship Contest, where high school seniors demonstrate knowledge of money management to compete for high school scholarship funds for college, rather. This was the 7th year that we completed, and $10,000 was awarded to high school seniors who are continuing their education in Kansas. So more information on that is available on our website. We spend a great deal of time letting high school counselors and nonprofit organizations know that's available. As to the nonprofits that we funded that I spoke about a minute ago, we gave to Consumer Credit Counseling Services a grant that provided services for 4,500 people, housing and credit counseling for 824, the PANDO initiative, which operates a program called Reality U that takes a high schooler and advances, okay, 10 years from now, here's your circumstances. What your job is, what your education is, what your family size is, where you live, you manage your money. So it's kind of a simulation-based game that has been highly received. That got to almost 3,000 people. And then the Kansas Council on Economic Education, which is a personal finance challenge, and Life Smarts business for grades 6 to 12. 1,350. So total consumers, almost $10,000 that were served in 2021. We also handle consumer inquiries and complaints. We receive about 1,100 inquiries per year, and maybe 190 or 200 of those inquiries turn into a formal complaint where the consumer actually files a complaint against a lender. We are not a judge and jury. We are simply a mediator trying to resolve the issues, and we do a very, very good job of that. As of Monday of this week, we had one that was outstanding. So all the others had been resolved with cooperation from the banks and the consumers. So that concludes my report on the state of the Kansas banking.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, Commissioner. I have a couple questions, Mr. Chair, if I may, but they kind of follow the same line. On the Money Transmitter Act you guys had here, the things you cover, Western Union and then PayPal, I assume Cash App is on there as well. Does that cover any money transmitters of cryptocurrency?
I didn't.
Cryptocurrency?
No, not yet. Those rules and regs are still being formulated, and they're changing so rapidly. We do make note if they're involved in something, but there is no standard. And again, we don't do a safety and soundness examination. We simply do a compliance exam.
I know last year we had discussed, I asked you about the same time about the need, if there was any need from your office's perspective of some regulations on cryptocurrency in the state of Kansas. I think we discussed that Nebraska was contemplating some legislation. Do you see the need for it right now? And
Based on inquiries from the banks that we regulate, it's minimal right now. But I think once it opens up, it's going to open wide up. I think a lot of in terms of cryptocurrency, the Federal Reserve is rolling out, they're developing something, and I think that will bring some stability to the market because it will be the Fed's deal instead of my deal.
Stable coin, yeah.
Correct. There'll be a fiat behind it.
Okay, and what was, do you know of the current status of the legislation in Nebraska, if that ever went anywhere?
I think it has. Wyoming has been very aggressive as well. As a matter of fact, the banking commissioner in Wyoming has just left his position to take one in the private sector in that industry and has relocated to Nevada. So I think that Nevada is going to be an initial entrant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Representative Flacco?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, sir. I was going to ask a little bit about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin because, quite frankly, I'm having a hard time getting my hands wrapped around exactly what I talked to several people who in the financial industry, and they said, well, it's an asset. I said, okay, how do you determine the value of that? He says, whatever the market bears. Is that a fair statement?
First off, I think that you are not alone in your willingness to try to learn about Bitcoin because we're trying to do the same thing, all of us. I think it is somewhat fair in that there is a market, a very, very volatile market for Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. And people are becoming perhaps a little more comfortable. And my hope is that that comfort does not turn into a lackadaisical attitude about, and they don't understand the risks that are involved and the volatility of that asset if it is in fact an asset. If it is, it's not an asset like the dollar bill in your pocket. It is very, very volatile, and there is no government back to it, so you are at the risk of the market.
Okay, I'll accept that. That's kind of the gist of what I was getting. I asked this person some other questions, and the more I asked them, the less I liked it. So, but that's just my opinion. I have one more question, and this goes back to, I think you were talking about 11,000 entities in the state that are what I'm going to classify as a payday loan or title loan establishments. Is that what we were talking about?
That's included in the total.
Included
Yes.
in that.
Yes. Anybody that extends credit. So it would be a pawn shop, a payday lender.
They're just
They are a non-depository lender. So yes, that's included in that 11,000 number.
Okay, the question is on that is, and I think I heard you say that they're under the same guidelines and restrictions as any other financial institution as far as your agency is concerned?
In terms of compliance with law.
Correct.
Yes, but we do not examine their balance sheet.
If I'm going to, and I think I asked this question of you one other time, if these entities are owned by a bank or some other kind of financial institution outside that operates outside the state of Kansas, does your office still have jurisdiction over the policies of that parent bank or organization for the entity that's operating here as a cash loan type establishment?
Yes, sir. If the entity is a subsidiary of the bank or the bank's holding company, we would pick it up in our examination process, especially if it was a subsidiary of the bank. If it were a second subsidiary of the bank's holding company, then it would probably fall under the jurisdiction of the Federal Reserve Bank because bank holding companies are regulated by the Fed. If it's headquartered in Kansas and operates in another state, yes, we still take a look.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and we've got time for one question. Representative Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make it real quick. So on the PPP loans, but the banks all did. There was a fee associated that the banks collected on that, correct? Do you know, looking at their balance sheets, they obviously have had a great year. So how much of that was the PPP fee income?
I'm sorry, I don't have
Okay.
that right now, but I'll be happy to.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We are about 30 seconds from the appointed hour to dismiss, so our meeting is adjourned. I'll tell you that on next Wednesday, no meeting on Monday, next Wednesday, the 19th, we're going to go to the rural development side of our committee. We're going to have Trisha Purden, who's the director of the Kansas Office of Rural Prosperity, that is going to be here, and she's going to report to us on her first 8 months in the job. Trisha happens to have an office in the city I live and lives in Coffeyville, which is inside my district, and she's been in this job for 8 months. I spent 7 of those months filling in as the interim for her as they hunted for someone to replace her in Montgomery County. And she will be here to cover that, and she's also going to talk about a little bit for us on what she sees with the ROS program from the time that she worked with it as economic developer and what she sees for some of the changes that might need to come up, which we'll discuss later this month. So we'll be off on Monday, and on Wednesday, we'll have Trisha Purden, and it'll be our rural development portion of our committee. So we are adjourned.